There are experiences women go through with absolute clarity, yet almost never put into words. Not because they're hiding something, not because they're being deceptive, and not because they lack honesty, but because awareness doesn't arrive the way most men think it does. Most men believe feelings follow understanding, that someone knows what they feel, understands why they feel it, and then acts accordingly. But that's not how attraction works. That's not how distance works. That's not how emotional shifts actually happen. What comes first isn't logic. It isn't a decision. It isn't even a thought. It's a sensation. Something changes internally before language ever shows up, before logic tries to make sense of it, before explanation even becomes possible. And right there is where the confusion begins. A woman can feel drawn to someone without knowing why. She can feel uneasy without being able to name the cause. She can feel a shift in connection without remembering the exact moment it happened. From the outside, it looks inconsistent. From the inside, it feels real, immediate, undeniable, because emotion doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wait for permission. It just arrives. And once it arrives, the mind steps in, not to question it, but to justify it. The human brain isn't wired to challenge emotion first. It's wired to explain it, to build a story that makes the feeling make sense. And once that story forms, it feels true, not because it was carefully chosen, but because it restores internal order. That's why explanations change over time, not because the feeling was fake, but because understanding evolves. What felt confusing yesterday suddenly feels obvious weeks later. What once felt certain gets reframed completely. And here's the part most men struggle with. Because you were taught something different. You were taught to mean what you say, to say what you mean, to stand by your words. So when explanations shift, it feels like manipulation, like inconsistency, like dishonesty. But most of the time, it's not deception. It's sequence. Feeling first, language second, and that gap creates tension, especially for men who were raised to believe clarity should come before emotion, not after it. Nowhere is this more obvious than attraction. Attraction is often treated like a decision, like someone evaluates options and chooses how to feel. But attraction is not a choice. It's a response. A woman doesn't decide what affects her nervous system. She notices what already has, and often she notices it late, after the feeling has already started. That creates internal conflict because the mind wants structure. It wants logic. It wants explanations that align with identity, values, and past statements. But attraction doesn't follow those rules. It can appear quietly, unexpectedly, and sometimes it contradicts everything that was said before. That doesn't make it shallow, and it doesn't make it dishonest. It reveals something much more uncomfortable. That attraction is discovered, not chosen. And once you realize that, the illusion of control disappears. For many women, that's hard to explain, not because they're hiding truth, but because the truth is still forming. So when they talk about attraction or distance, they're not describing where it started. They're describing where they are now, their current understanding, not the origin. And that's why answers can feel vague, why explanations feel incomplete, why things don't fully add up, not because there's no depth, but because the emotion existed before the explanation caught up. For men, especially men over 40 or 50, this clashes hard with how you've lived your life. You come from a world where responsibility mattered, where words carried weight, where saying something meant commitment. So when emotional explanations feel unstable, it doesn't just feel confusing, it feels disrespectful. But beneath the surface, something else is happening. There's a delay, a lag between what is felt and what is understood. And inside that lag, there's silence. Not silence directed at you, but internal silence. A space where something is deeply felt, but not yet named. And that space controls everything that comes next. Because what isn't understood can't be clearly expressed, not out loud, sometimes not even internally. This is the first truth most women will never openly admit. Feelings come before clarity. Attraction comes before permission. Understanding comes after the experience. From the outside, it looks confusing. From the inside, it feels completely natural. Emotion moves first. Words follow later. And when men react only to the words instead of the process behind them, misunderstanding becomes inevitable. Distance grows. Conflict builds. And both sides feel like they're not being seen. Now here's where it gets even quieter. Because when emotion stops trying to explain itself, silence takes over. And silence is where most men misread everything. Most men see silence as a problem. They associate it with distance, punishment, confusion. They assume something is wrong and it needs to be fixed. But silence doesn't always mean conflict. Very often, it means something has already ended internally. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. And that's hard to accept because you were taught that problems show themselves, that endings come with explanations, that tension becomes visible. But emotional withdrawal doesn't announce itself like that. It fades in, softly. A woman doesn't usually shut down emotionally during arguments, because arguments still contain energy. They still involve engagement. There's still something there. What actually closes her off is the absence of feeling. When nothing inside her responds anymore, there's nothing left to argue about. And that's why silence feels so unsettling, because it removes all the signals you're used to reading. No anger, no explanation, no visible rejection, just a shift in tone, in energy, in presence. And for a man who values clarity, that feels almost unbearable. But here's the reality. Silence isn't meant to send you a message. It's the result of a decision that already happened internally. She didn't wake up one day and decide to pull away. She noticed it gradually. Her responses got softer. Her curiosity faded. Her emotional reactions stopped activating. And once she becomes aware of that shift, there's often nothing she feels compelled to explain, because explanation follows emotion, not the other way around. This leads to the second truth most men never hear. Absence is more final than conflict. Conflict still means connection. Friction still means contact. But absence means separation. A woman can argue with someone she still feels something for. She cannot argue when there's nothing left inside her reacting. That's why trying to provoke a reaction once silence sets in almost never works. Not because she's being difficult, but because the emotional system has already shut down. And for many men, especially older men, that's hard to accept because your entire life taught you something else. Effort works. Show up. Be consistent. Stay persistent. And you'll get results. And in most areas of life, that's true, but not here. Because attraction doesn't respond to effort the same way success does. Effort can reassure, but it doesn't always activate. What activates is emotional contrast. And that leads to the third truth, one that's rarely admitted out loud. Calm influences attraction more than visible effort, not indifference, not games, not pulling away as a tactic. Calm, a man who is steady, grounded, unreactive. He doesn't chase attention. He doesn't signal urgency. He doesn't need constant reassurance. And that creates space. And space changes perception. When someone is always emotionally on, there's nothing left to notice. But when someone is calm, stable, self-contained, attention shifts toward them naturally. That's uncomfortable to admit because it contradicts everything most men were taught. That effort equals value. But attraction doesn't reward effort directly. It responds to emotional positioning. Calm doesn't chase. It doesn't convince. It doesn't explain. It simply exists. And that kind of presence carries weight. That's why a woman can feel more drawn to a man who says less, reacts less, explains less. Not because he's better, but because his emotional state isn't trying to control hers. And that gives her space to feel. And space is where attraction reorganizes. Put all of this together, and a pattern starts to emerge. Emotion comes before explanation. Silence follows internal resolution. And calm shapes perception more than effort ever will. These aren't tricks. They aren't strategies, they're observations, raw, uncomfortable truths about how emotional systems actually behave when they're not being forced or managed. Most misunderstandings between men and women don't come from bad intentions. They come from reacting to different stages of the same process. Men respond to words. Women respond to feelings long before words exist. And when that gap isn't understood, both sides feel invisible. And silence becomes louder than anything that was ever said. If you're starting to see this differently now, if something here made you pause and rethink the way you interpret attraction and distance, then you're already ahead of most men. And this is exactly the kind of insight we break down every week. So if you want to understand the deeper psychology behind attraction, silence, and emotional shifts, make sure you subscribe to Love, Lies, and Reality, because what you don't understand will always control the outcome. And the next video will show you exactly how to read the moments most men completely miss,